TIL. In his college days, Steve Wozniak used a blue box, an illegal phone hacking device, to call the Vatican. He pretended to be Henry Kissinger and asked to speak with the Pope but was denied because the Pope was asleep. One of my neighbors growing up was this very devout Catholic woman, and she told us a story once about how she and her sister were arguing about some teaching, and to settle it, they called the Vatican. As the story goes, they got through, but the person who answered asked if it was an emergency for which they needed to wake the Pope. At that point, they apologized and hung up because they didn't think they'd get that far. When you're smart enough to hack the phone system, but you forget about time zones. The widespread ability to blue box, once limited to just a few isolated individuals exploring the telephone network, developed into a subculture. Famous phone freaks such as John Captain Crunch Draper, Mark Burney, and Al Burney used blue boxes to explore the various hidden codes that were not dialable with a standard telephone. Some of the more famous pranksters were Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, founders of Apple Computer. On one occasion Wozniak dialed Vatican City and identified himself as Henry Kissinger, imitating Kissinger's German accent, and asked to speak to the Pope, who was sleeping at the time. Wozniak said in 1986. I called only to explore the phone company as a system, to learn the codes and tricks. I'd talk to the London operator, and convince her I was a New York operator. When I called my parents and my friends, I paid. After 6 months I quit. I'd done everything that I could. I was so pure. Now I realize others were not as pure, they were just trying to make money. But then I thought we were all pure. Love how many industry giants did crazy shit like this in their past. What a freak. Freaking, https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/freaking, is really interesting. From this link. Other early freaks, such as Bill from New York, William Bill Acker 1953 to 2015, began to develop a rudimentary understanding of how phone networks worked. Bill discovered that a recorder, https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/recorder_musical_instrument, he owned could also play the tone at 2600 Hz with the same effect. John Draper, https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/John_Draper, discovered through his friendship with Ingressia that the free whistles given out in Captain Crunch, https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/cap%27n_crunch, cereal boxes also produced a 2600 Hz tone when blown, providing his nickname, Captain Crunch. This allows control of phone systems that work on single frequency, https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/single frequency_signaling, SF, controls. One can sound a long whistle to reset the line, followed by groups of whistles, a short tone for a 1, 2 for a 2, etc. To dial numbers. \8 https://en. Wikipedia, org/wiki/freaking #site_note8. Steve the Woz. I always think of Pirates of Silicon Valley when this is brought up. I built a blue box in HS, tried it once to make sure it worked, then realized I didn't want to talk to anybody. This is the difference between him and Steve Jobs. Don't forget Captain Crunch, whose moniker came from the fact that he discovered that Captain Crunch cereals contained a toy whistle which blew a tone at 2600 Hz. This frequency basically gave you access to do things like make free phone calls. I'm reading Ghost in the Wires right now about this pre-internet phone hacking community that was in. Great book so far, like Catch Me If You Can but with phones and computers. Phone freaking was the shit back in the day. Early online days were like wandering a new planet, complete with inevitable red shirt-like deaths due to the pureness and innocence of all but the egghead first adopters, who had been sitting up until dark 30 making ANSI mods, playing with fractal algorithms, or checking out the latest European trip tapes from the Usenet goodie bag. The days when no ticker sign in town was safe. Het. Book smart enough to create a blue box. Street dumb enough to not know how time zones work. Sounds about right. Also, it was trivial to use those keychains that recorded short samples, usually of fart sounds he, to record a pitch that signaled to a payphone that change was inserted, since the mechanism basically would play a pitch through the phone, and have free phone calls forever. According to Wikipedia, Wozniak graduated from high school in 1968. That means the Pope he didn't talk to would have been Pope Paul VI, whose pontificate lasted from 1963 to 1978. Just in case anyone else was curious. I'd love to hear Woz do Kissinger. If phone freaking interests anyone, please give a listen to Evan Doorbell's How I Became a Phone Freak, https://soundcloud.com/evandoorbell/howfreak01. I grew up in the same area as him, only 30 years later, so I enjoyed listening to it a lot. What perhaps should be explained to the younger crowd, who have grown up or gotten used to long-distance phone calls either being inexpensive or free, back when the Woz was doing this, long-distance calls were quite expensive, so making a long-distance call itself was a fairly rare event, especially transoceanic. This rapidly changed with telecom advances such as fiber optic cables. I remember when someone smart, I forget who, predicted that due to fiber optic cables, long-distance domestic calls would be free in a few years. I thought they were crazy. Happened faster than they predicted, and today, if you include services such as Skype, WhatsApp, Line, etc. Even international is free. And regular phone international is pretty cheap compared to the past. Wiki on Blue Box, https://en.m. Wikipedia, org/wiki/blue_box. Hey all, Steve here, http://explodingthephone.com/. Back in the 80s us bored-ass latchkey kids were living during the heyday of the mall. And payphones were just there, waiting to be fucked with. So we did. There's a Venn diagram between Scott Wozniak, Steve Wozniak, and Steve Jobs. I remember reading about all the freaking boxes back in the 90s and realizing almost none of that shit worked anymore. Woz gets free phone calls with this one weird trick. AT&T hates him. We had freaking codes, late 80s, but not a box. We called China and Australia. That was pretty wild to us because long-distance calls required one to mortgage their house to pay for them. Hearing someone answer the phone in Chinese was surreal. I remember this being done in my high school hallway and in a movie theater lobby. We also would set up mailboxes, voicemail, at companies. Codes were obtained on BBSs. Was fun. I liked that they believed he was who he said he was, but even so, he called one of the like 4 people who would not be impressed. I'm fairly sure that the device itself is not illegal, but it is often used for illegal purposes. The same applies to lockpicks, they are not illegal but thieves use them for illegal purposes. Blue boxes is actually how Wozniak and Jobs got started with Apple. Learned that from an episode of Mysteries at the Museum, but had no idea about the Pope part. NGL at first I thought you said Scott Wozniak. Like could you imagine? Hey all. Scott here, I tried calling the Pope to vent my frustrations about Chibi-Robo, Ziplash but the old dog was asleep. You guys obviously didn't read the Anarchist's cookbook then. Then later on the drive home. I called the Pope from a payphone. I said I was the cops. And your cardinal's in jail. The state looks down on sodomy. I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s when these still worked but were getting less useful with newer phones. Loved seeing them in the movie Hackers. Radio Shack had these handheld keypad sound generators and you just needed to swap out one of the resistors or something with a different one to change the pitch to match the tone the phone makes when specific coins are put in. Basically, the way payphones worked was they would send a sound over the line like a high-pitched beep when coins were deposited to signal the phone company it was paid. Not sure how it helped him contact the Vatican. Wozniak, smart enough to hack phones on the 70s, dumb enough to not consider time zones.